How do you feel about starting at the 4, or the concept of starting at the 4, or even coming off the bench? And the second question is...
For me?
Oh. I guess that answers that part.
I mean, I don't know where that started, where that came from. Hey, P, they said I got to come off the bench. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, how do you...
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think coming into the situation of what that role is and what my role is and what I have to do, it makes things a lot easier. I'm not trying to figure it out on the fly. I'm not trying to make adjustments as we go on. Like, I know what this team expects of me. I know what I expect of myself. And that's it. It's basketball at the end of the day.
Just when you come off the bench.
I think everybody's optimistic, right? We all don't know how none of this is going to play out, right? So, yeah, I'm new to this. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, we all going to camp to try to figure out what works for this team in order to win the championship. So, if that time comes, we have that conversation, right? And my goal is to go into training camp, be the best player I can be in the best shape I can be, and do what I have to do to help this team get over the hump and win the championship. And that's all it is. And all the questions of coming off the bench and I don't even want to answer those questions at the end of the day. Whatever I have to do to help this team win the championship, then that's what's going to be.
All right, and so I put those two clips together to serve as a backdrop to lead us into this discussion about ego and mindfulness. And so you think about those two words and you understand how they contrast. When somebody is mindful, then that means that they're very deliberate in whatever decisions they make, whatever persona they exhibit. So when you think about Carmelo Anthony and those clips where he laughed off coming off the bench, and first of all, the gentleman asked him, would he be willing to play the 4 or come off the bench? He didn't say that he had to come off the bench. So there was even delusion in his response to that question based on his ego. He laughed when it was unnecessary to, even with the ideology that he has about himself and his contribution and his talent level. He was deluded enough to misinterpret the question, which happens a lot when people are emotional. They don't use logic in their retort or their rebuttal. It's all based on a defensiveness. And so having said that, let's define a couple of words here. And then we'll go over what hubris is, which is a beautiful term. It communicates exactly what I want to about Carmelo Anthony, and then in making that comparison to our lives and how we can avoid the same pitfall. And so let's define ego. Basically, ego is the I or self of any person. It's what the person thinks about himself that distinguishes him from any other person. Psychoanalytically, it's the part of the psychic apparatus that experiences and reacts to the outside world, and thus mediates between the primitive drives of the id and the demands of whatever the environment is. Think about that. It reacts to the outside world, and it mediates between the primitive drives and whatever societal or physical demands of the environment are. And then you have related words: egotism, conceit, self-importance, self-admiration, self-pride. And all of these things in moderate doses aren't necessarily bad. Just understand that I'm not saying that you should have a low self-esteem, a low view of self, a low self-worth. Clearly that's not the case, even if you base that on the last video that we went over Derrick Rose's career. Believe in yourself. So of course you should believe in yourself. You should understand your value, but a part of understanding your value also means that you don't overvalue yourself. Of course you don't want to undervalue yourself, but you don't want to overvalue yourself because, again, the market will tell you. The market won't lie. And that's the beauty of capitalism. And by the way, what we have now, meaning, in the United States, is not capitalism. It's far from let the market decide. This is a heavily regulated economy that we have that's based on a currency or economic model that is not self-sustaining, which is what capitalism is. And so that's why you hear, socialism being pushed and being championed by, politicians and other social figures. Of course, it's to push an agenda, and I'll get into that in other videos, but true capitalism is a good thing because the market, again, will tell you exactly what the goods and services are that are supposed to be produced and that will be successful, and those things which should not be produced and will not be successful. And so it's very simple when you think about it like that. The theory of it is simple. The practice of it is not as simple, but it's still a simple concept to understand. But anyway, so back to the idea of ego and thinking more highly of yourself than you should. Clearly we see what the NBA has told Carmelo. The NBA is the market that Carmelo is in. That's the environment, the physical and social environment. Now, social environment is, the NBA and then pop culture in general, because the fans have weighed in. Casual and occasional fans have weighed in on the situation, and they've expressed what they feel about Carmelo. A lot of people say he's washed. He's a bum. He's a hindrance to a team. Whatever. My belief is that he's only a hindrance because of his ego, his hubris. And so let's go to the definition of being mindful and then aware. So to be mindful, that means that you're attentive or careful. And then it relates to the psychological technique of mindfulness. So somebody who's mindful is attentive and careful. Attentive what? To what? In this case, Carmelo Anthony should be attentive to his skill set, to the NBA climate, and to what his contributions can be to a team based on his goal. And so you ask yourself, what is his goal? That I don't know. He said that he wants to win in one breath, and he's also said that he's not really concerned about winning in another breath. So I don't know. But that's a decision that Carmelo Anthony has to make for himself. And then you look at the word aware and what that means. Having knowledge, conscious, cognizant, informed, alert, knowledgeable, sophisticated. So these things, again, speak to a realistic understanding of oneself, of one's environment, and of one's relation to his environment. And then you look at Carmelo Anthony's career, his current situation, his recent situation, and you ask yourself, what is his level of mindfulness and awareness? And then how would you describe his ego? And then you put those things in a pot and you take it out, and what do you have? What I want to do is point out the decisions that he's made and where they've landed him so that we can discuss how we can avoid making those same decisions. All right, so now that we have ego, mindful, and aware out of the way, and we have an understanding of what those concepts mean, let's move into hubris. And so like I mentioned earlier, I think Carmelo Anthony's career has really exhibited the concept of hubris to a T. And again, this is not to pick on Carmelo Anthony, and I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea of what the goal is for this video. As I mentioned, I'm merely using his career as a backdrop. If Carmelo Anthony is honest with himself, he'll agree with what I'm saying. And that's not to say that I know everything But it's clear that when you think about those concepts and you think about his career and you line them up, I mean, truth is truth and everything else is a lie. So it's really quite simple. So having said that, hubris is defined as extreme pride, self-confidence, and arrogance shown by a character, which ultimately brings about his downfall. But hubris is a typical flaw in the personality of a character who enjoys a powerful position, as a result of which he overestimates his capabilities to such an extent that he loses contact with reality. A character suffering from hubris tries to cross normal human limits and violates moral codes. Examples of hubris are found in major characters of tragic plays. And then you have some synonyms, as you can see: conceit, haughtiness, self-importance, egotism, pomposity, superciliousness, superiority. Now, what I'm doing is I'm taking the concept of hubris, which is basically used in literature to describe characters on certain stories. But if you notice, they mention tragic plays. And if you think about Carmelo Anthony's career, one could look at it tragically. If you look at it from a certain perspective, I don't think it's tragic at all. I mean, he's made a whole bunch of money. You know, depending on who you believe, he's earned, and this is just NBA money, about $259 million. So, I mean, you know, you can call that tragic if you want to. I don't think it's tragic at all, you know, but I'm different that way. You know, I don't really find value in earthly possessions, you know, but I understand that if you want to maximize on your value, then you should absolutely do that, you know, if you chase those things. But to me, to have a trophy, to have a ring, it's cool, man. And I get it. It's more so about the bragging rights, the company that it puts you in, the solidification of your career. I get all of that. But to me, at the end of the day, people will have their opinions about you. They're going to love you or hate you regardless. It's much more important that you have a good quality of life, a high quality of living that you can both enjoy yourself and that your family can enjoy. And so for that reason, to have amassed that much money, which can afford him, his wife, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and his other loved ones, a great lifestyle, a comfortable lifestyle, I would say that far outweighs any accolades that you can achieve in professional sport. And so I wouldn't call it tragic. However, the concept of hubris definitely describes his career. Hubris is a term that's used in literature to describe, you know, the tragedy that is a character's arc who has a diluted image or perception of self. And so what I wanted to do with that context is parallel to Carmelo Anthony's career, in that, as you can see, typically the person in an authoritative position is so proud of his qualities that he forms a delusion. Now here, of course, we're talking about Greek mythology, so we're dealing with gods, you know, mythological gods. Carmelo's in a power position. You know, his status in the league has commanded him a great deal of money, a great deal of prestige, love by fans, respect by peers. And so all of that has caused him to have an inflated image of self, which has led to this delusion that he's still on the same level that he was as when he was a rookie. Now he'll probably say, of course, he knows he's older, but to say some of the things that he said in recent memory leads me to believe that he is in fact delusional in thinking that he should never be a bench player. Now, of course, I understand that the competitive fire within a person, that part of his ego, which is more so pride, is getting in the way of his better judgment. I get that. He's human. Nobody's perfect. But again, this is not necessarily as much to judge Carmelo Anthony as it is just to show that having the kind of mentality and mindset that he has can lead you into ruin and into folly. And so basically what we're saying here is that the tragic flaw in Carmelo's career is that he has a delusional idea of himself. And so the lesson here is to always be self-aware. Again, we've already gone over what aware means. Being attentive and careful and conscious and cognizant and mindful. That means you know exactly who you are, where you stand, what your environment is, and what your relationship is to that environment. And so to me, again, it goes back to what Carmelo Anthony's goal is. And until I hear him say it from his mouth, I won't postulate, I won't speculate. I want to go over a few examples of hubris in literature. So again, just parallel to Carmelo Anthony's life, just so we can see how we can avoid getting caught up in ourselves. Because again, it's really easy to, because the flesh wants to please itself. It wants to gratify itself. It wants to be loved. It wants attention. It craves those things. It feeds off those things. It's like that plant in the Little Shop of Horrors, which I know a lot of you have never seen, don't know anything about. Google it. But basically, you know, the plant would say to its owner, feed me, Seymour, feed me. That's the human ego, the human psyche. It wants to be fed. So back to the first example in Oedipus Rex, where we have the King Oedipus character being our subject, the sufferer of hubris. And basically, his hubris caused him to have a reversal of fortune. And so basically, this is a guy who was trying to rebel against his fate, whose fortune was reversed based on his hubris. So again, he was party to his own demise. And so again, man, if you look at Carmelo Anthony's lot right now and ask yourself, has he tried to rebel against his fate? I'll leave it at that. Example 2, Paradise Lost. And so John Milton portrays Satan as a character that suffers from hubris. He loses his glorious position through giving in to his excessive pride. It was his hubris that made him try to take control over heaven. And of course, we know he failed miserably. But he's quoted as saying, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Hey, to each his own. If you're fully aware of what heaven and hell are, and you choose hell over heaven, more power to you. But again, we see the term excessive pride. Example 3, Dr. Faustus. And so we see the term arrogance, extreme pride, irresistible desire to become superior to all other men. And this caused him to sell his soul to Lucifer. This is where the term Faustian deal comes from. And we'll cover that in a different video as well. That can get deep. I definitely look forward to covering that. And then it says, finally, he has to pay for his arrogance and pride. The devil takes away his soul to hell, and he suffers eternal damnation. So you ask yourself, what are you willing to risk by having excessive pride? What are you willing to risk? But of course, in order to answer that honestly, you have to understand what's at stake. And so again, that's why it's important to be aware. What's your environment? What's the market? What's the best that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? What are you willing to tolerate? All these things are questions you have to ask yourself. unless you just want to walk around in life like a zombie just existing, which I'm sure none of us really want to do if we're honest with ourselves.
All right, Colin, thanks. Time for our final topic of the day. It appears that Carmelo Anthony is done in Houston. He's missed the last 2 games with an illness, and now there are reports the Rockets will get rid of him. He's only played in 10 games, and Houston has gotten off to a rough start this season. Shannon, would this be the right move by the Rockets?
I believe so, Skip. But to be perfectly clear, I do not believe this is all Carmelo Anthony's fault. He was never a lockdown defender. He's an offensive force, but his offensive game is not what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And so when you lose Ariza, you lose Mbah Moute, clearly you're going to suffer defensively. And so it's hard to play Melo and James Harden when neither of these guys are very good at defense. They've gone from 7th last year in defensive rating to 19th. Offensive rating, they were number 1. This year, they're 23rd. So I don't think they should have signed Melo. You and I were both. I don't think it was a good signing to begin with. But clearly, no matter what you think about Carmelo, whether he can or he can't play, it's not working. So let's just move on.
Okay. So I did say before this all happened, this was going to be a mistake because it was the reverse of the old cliche. This was going to be subtraction by addition. Mm-hmm. This was going to make them worse. They were going to lose their defensive identity.
Right.
And Carmelo, to me, in Oklahoma City a year ago, and I love Carmelo. I enjoy him personally, but he's on his last legs. He's close to being washed up. Mm-hmm. And he was never anything much more than a really great low post scorer, but a high volume shooter who did make teammates better and played little to no defense.
Right.
Well, that's the wrong fit for these guys.
Correct.
So everything went south. Defense went south and offense lost its identity.
Right.
So they need to just cut bait and move on. And I hope he could find a home somewhere else, but I don't think it's going to be for a very good team, maybe for a bad team.
The Houston Rockets are also in action tonight, minus Carmelo Anthony, who's still listed as out with illness. Coach Mike D'Antoni was asked about that before the game.
Nice. Nothing like being healthy, is there?
You must have got whatever Melo had. You must have got whatever Melo had.
It's going around. No, you're not funny.
He's a little funny. Guys, speaking of dead horses, we have to talk about Carmelo Anthony and what's going on. He is, of course, listed as out with illness, but there are multiple reports that the team believes that they've seen him for the last time in a Rockets jersey. Rather than talking about perhaps a failed experiment with the Rockets, considering the situation he was thrust into, let's talk about where he could potentially fit, if in fact it is when, not if, he is waived by this team.
Yeah, it's going to happen. I always said, believe the players when we all talk to each other, because he's not talking to management. Carmelo's looking at his teammates going, I'm out of here.
Right.
So when the teammates all go like, yeah, he ain't coming back. He's not coming back. Yeah, so he probably ain't. And so it wasn't a failed experiment.
Wait, you have what Melo has too?
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's got it going around. Grant's got it now too. Yeah, the experiment didn't work. There's not maybe a possibly failed experiment. That's a failed experiment. Where does he go? I don't know. I'm just being honest now. Okay, the guy was a hell of a scorer, could really score. His inability to defend, pass the ball, get to the hole, drive, get fouled. He's kind of he's a spot shooter now. I just don't know how many people are going to be in the market for a spot shooter in today's unbelievably athletic game where everybody switches, everybody does all kinds of stuff. That was tough for Melo to do 5 years ago. Not at this age right now. So I just don't see a lot of places for him. Honestly, I don't. I wish him well. I mean, he had a hell of a career, but it's coming to an end. It'd be nice to see him go to the right situation, but I can't think of one off the top of my head where I say, boy, Melo fits right here.
And that sounds like a really dead horse. I do think it's hard when you're a player like Carmelo, who, as you're saying, had some shortcomings to his game, even when he was an elite player. Mm-hmm. But he was able to offset that with his scoring. And he was a high-volume shooter who kind of had a different style that doesn't fit and is not, totally consistent with today's game. And so making that adjustment as you get older, as you're unable to still play the way you are accustomed to playing, is a hard thing to do for a player like Carmelo Anthony. And there's been other examples of players who've done that as well.
All right, and so very briefly, we'll just go over the current situation. Now, clearly we know that At this point, Carmelo Anthony has been let go by the Rockets. His tenure there was very short, 10 games. Some say it ended somewhat awkwardly or strange, peculiar, what have you. What I will say is this. If the Rockets were trying to use Carmelo as a scapegoat to explain or to justify their slow start, I would say that was shame on them. Does not reflect well on them. And it really goes to show you, again, how one has to put self above the team at all times, because it's a business. It's about economics. So, having said that, I don't want to say that that's what the Rockets were thinking, but if that's the case, shame on them, because Carmelo was far from the issue. They were battling all types of demons, whether it be the suspension of Chris Paul, the injury to James Harden, the loss of Trevor Reese and Luke Bamute, and then just having new pieces on their team, having to, incorporate them into the offense, and then not playing defense well, not communicating. So there were a whole host of issues that Houston has to deal with before they can get back on track and achieve their goal of winning the championship. And so some call this an experiment with Carmelo Anthony, and you could say that it was an experiment. That's probably fair. But what's not fair is to say that he's the reason that they were losing. And so, having said that, what I want to note here is that Carmelo really has no one to blame but himself for this, even though he's not at fault for being the reason that the Rockets are who they are currently. It's still Carmelo's fault that he's even in this position, hopping from OKC to Atlanta to Houston, and now basically not having a team, shopping different offers, putting himself once again at the mercy of the market. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, man, but I just want to reiterate and reinforce to you, beloved, that it's supremely important that we are always honest with ourselves, because we can fool ourselves. But again, whatever environment we are in will read us, as they say colloquially. They will definitely read us, man. And they give it to us straight. So why not give it to ourselves straight and be honest with ourselves? And that's really what it boils down to. Now, some of us have delusions of grandeur at certain points in our life. My prayer is that if you ever get into that stage of your life, that it's a short stint, that it's a brief stage, that you can blink and get over it and move forward with your life. Because if you wallow in self-delusion, then all you're doing is setting yourself up for a great fall. And the longer you're in that delusion, the greater your fall will be. And so I'll leave you with this. In my role as youth director at a church that I recently attended, I would always tell my beloved teens that either we are to be humble or we're going to be humbled. Either way, we will be humble. So it behooves us to come to the table already humble and not have to wait for God to humble us. And so we can see that in this case, believe it or not, it's clear to see that Carmelo Anthony is being humbled. You go from laughing off, coming off the bench, to going to a team where you have to come off the bench, to being cut by that team within the first 10 games of an NBA season, which is 82 games, by the way. So you tell me, is he humbled? And that is what it is. But having said that, man, I'm definitely praying for the homie to bounce back. Again, this is not a shade-throwing session for Carmelo Anthony. And I pray that if he ever views this, that he can see that that's not what this is. But, if he does, I can't control that. All I can control is what my views are. My views are this. This is a cautionary tale. And like most things in life, we can extract wisdom from it, and we can avoid the same pitfalls that the subject fell to. Simple as that. And that's the sacrifice we make as people. The mistakes that we make are supposed to be made so that other people won't make them, if we really living right. All right, beloved, we reached the end of this coverage. Again, like I said, I'm going to do a postscript where I break down Carmelo Anthony's career stats and do a few player analyses, one being the player comp based on projections, and then I'll compare his career to a few other players' careers just so you can see where he ranks truly. But back to this coverage, man, again, I don't want to keep harping on the same topics, but repetition does work. It's a propaganda tactic, but for good reason, because the more times you repeat something, the more it's likely to set in and sink in. And so you could say, if this is propaganda that I'm pushing, it's definitely that. One should always be self-aware. One should always be mindful. One should avoid having an ego and falling into hubris. And one should always walk wisely and circumspectly. And so if you want to call that propaganda, that's fine. But again, beloved, it's my prayer that this reached you on a level that was able to penetrate you past all defensiveness, both for Carmelo and yourself, and that you can get to the point where you can be honest with yourself and really seek to be self-aware so that you can progress and live a high quality of life, as opposed to walking through life as a zombie, having this false sense of self that can get you in trouble in many ways. I don't know what I'll do next, because quite frankly, whenever I start my next video, there's always some breaking news that pops up that's appropriate to the content and the tenor of my platform. So who knows? I think I know what I'm going to do next, but we'll see. Just know that something is coming soon, so stay tuned. As always, I thank you for the support, man. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. The love is definitely reciprocated. So until then, be blessed and be a blessing.
That's a wrap. Don't forget to like, share, follow, subscribe, and comment. Also check us out on IG, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Tumblr, and Patreon, all under LUSU Media Group. And as always, you can get in-depth content on Patreon once you subscribe. Also check out our LUSU Designs lifestyle apparel, which you can now purchase online. See the description for the links. And last but certainly not least, shout out all my sponsors for their support. Definitely appreciate the love on their end. Their info is also below in the description. Alright family, until next time, be blessed and be a blessing.